Hello everyone, it's Tony here from Lockster Reads. I have a reading update because I've actually finished some books. Yes, you'd think a reading channel on YouTube would have made reading books a priority, but funnily, I've been ill, and I've been depressed, and I've been miserable, and but I have managed to turn that around and get my brain back in gear, and I have finished 3 books. They're all non-fiction, so if that's not your bag, then it's probably not worth watching the rest of this channel. They are different eras of history, um, and let's start. Well, I'll do them in the order which I've finished them. So, the Unwritten Order, Hitler's Role in the Final Solution by Peter Longerich. This basically traces the development um, of Hitler's anti-Semitism through until he gets into power. When he gets into power, through until the creation of and action that is the murder solution. Um, it points out every step of the way how he is the person responsible, and that nothing would have happened without his say so. That he was quite capable of holding making things stop when they required them to do so, and he was perfectly capable of pushing them along when he wanted them to be pushed along. The murder solution really only gets into full gear after the invasion of the Soviet Union and the entry of America into the war. But some unpleasant solution for the Jews of Europe was always on the cards. Hitler was responsible for that. The fact that there is no written order is irrelevant because the Nazis obfuscated, euphemised, and basically tried to cover up what they were doing to a great degree because they knew fundamentally what they were doing was wrong. They tried to justify it to themselves as some great and holy mission, when in fact it was just the bitter and twisted anger of a group of people aimed at another group of people. The story of the world. Hitler is in many ways the sort of the loser's loser, but unfortunately he had the ability to meld people to his will, and that led to a terrible war and mass murder. Any attempts to paint Hitler as anything less than a petty, evil, unpleasant, pathetic person are embarrassing, frankly. Any attempt to deny the Holocaust is embarrassing. I've said many, many times that Holocaust denial is reality denial. Um, and this book is a good start. If you haven't really looked into the Holocaust as a as a policy and practice rather than as an historical event, this is a great introductory book to read. Actually, highly recommend it. It's really well written. It was written originally to it was developed from 2 papers he wrote for Deborah Lipstadt's defence against David Irving. I mentioned that in a previous blog. And as a result, it's actually very clear and very simple, and avoids too much jargon. There is a certain level of, when you're talking about military orders and people in hierarchies, there is a tendency for ridiculous job titles. The Germans in particular are great ones for creating ridiculously complex titles for things. Yeah, recommended. In fact, this is the first of the 3, but I'm going to recommend all 3 of them because I really enjoyed reading all 3 of them. This is less. This is more. This isn't academic, but but I said it's a great introduction. I think recommended read as an introduction if you're interested in that kind of thing. Know that it's not going to be pleasant, but I think you'd be an idiot not to realise that in the first place. Then I read The Eagle and the Hart, The Tragedy of Richard II and Henry IV by Helen Castor. This again was great, really well written. It's the it's the story of how one bad king with an incredible amount of self belief, who felt he was because he was the anointed king, he could do anything he liked, and his will was law. Um, and what happens when it turns out that people don't that acting inconsistently on a whim um, creates instability and distrust, and eventually somebody is going to try and overthrow you. In this case, Henry IV, who did overthrow Richard II, and became king. But it covers their whole life from their childhoods through to and it goes and after Richard II is overthrown, it goes through um, all of Henry IV's reign until, and actually a little bit of the start of Henry V's reign. It covers how their lives were intertwined, the people they knew. It's very good as well on. I mean, it's sounding horribly like a certain country and a certain president king when I say this, but it also covers how it's hard to come out of that period, that kind of rule of kingly whim, without being tarred by it if you're in a position of power. How people you have been involved in will be arrested and executed for treason, and even in, and then you were thinking, well, I was sort of involved in that, and how that leads to the pressure to support a king in terrible actions that don't make any sense and are not unconstitutional is the wrong word for this period of time. It's also very good on the problems that Henry IV created for himself by overthrowing a legitimate king. He did have some claim on the throne, but he spent a lot of his time of his reign basically trying to shore himself up. And Richard II comes out of this. If you know the story, I knew this story from the Shakespeare plays, and in that Richard II comes across as an arsehole, for want of a better word, and Henry IV comes across as quite a upstanding, cool, sensible human being. This book does nothing to dispel that. Richard II, like Tsar Nicholas II, like Charles I, have too much faith in their own divinity, for want of a better phrase, too much belief in their word is law. One of the things that this book really teaches you is that if you act constantly on a whim, people don't end up not being able to trust you at all, and therefore they hedge themselves against your whims, which in the end creates enemies, which in the end leads to your downfall. It's beautifully written. It's and it's a period of history. I don't. My historical expertise, if it can be called that, is more modern history. So this was an interesting read. It's made me really want to read more about the Hundred Years' War, and about the Wars of the Roses, which has come after this. Yeah, they do come after this. And more about sort of medieval British English history, which I know tiny bits about, and most of that is fed through the lens of William Shakespeare. Really good book. Highly recommended. And finally, probably my favourite of the three, just because again I'm bringing contemporary thinking and references in a dark time, in a time where bad people seem to be getting control of things. Bury the Chains, the British struggle to abolish slavery, is a book worth reading because it's a book that gives you hope. There's a certain type of British politician who likes to tell this story as if we acted in a magnanimous, beautiful Christian way to free the slaves, and the fact that we led the way, which kind of we didn't because Haiti got there first, and that was through their own battling power against two white empires, and that we should be forgiven all our other sins because of this, brackets, and World War Two, close brackets. But what this book does really well is to contextualise the fact that the British government had made British society and government had made shed loads of money from the slave trade. The British merchant navy was the dominant slave trading power, and the trade of slaves for sugar, for rum, for cotton, etc., was made the British huge amounts of money, which is why actually this is even more of a hopeful story, because if you'd said at the beginning of the 18th century that slavery would be brought to an end in a reasonably quick time, you probably would have been thought a fool. But the people that brought down slavery did it, and they did it in the face of hostile society. Well, actually, let's rephrase that: hostile government and hostile aristocracy. These people were making money off plantations in the West Indies. They were making money. They didn't want to end slavery, but a group of people, and it says in here, it starts basically with the 12 people that formed. They formed the society. I think it was 12 people in London, and they set up the Abolition Committee. And in the end, they ended the slave trade first, and then it took another, I think, 20 years to end slavery in the British Empire, and to free the slaves. It's also good on contextualising the fact that it wasn't just William Wilberforce. There were lots of other people involved. It talks about the role of women, particularly in the later stages, in the gap between ending the slave trade and ending slavery. It brings Thomas Clarkson back to the forefront. Him and Wilberforce were a great partnership. Wilberforce was doing William Wilberforce, who is the name that's usually attached to this story. He deserves credit. He was a conservative man in all other respects, but he deserves credit. A lot of these men were motivated. A lot of these people were motivated by religion, by Christianity. They were motivated by seeing slavery in action. But as this book says, they were motivated as much as anything else by empathy, by thinking these people are being treated abominably. They should not be treated like that, and being made to feel that was the most important thing. But also the other people given credit in this book, most importantly perhaps, are the slaves, ex-slaves, the black people of Africa and the West Indies, who through their own actions helped drive this campaign, sometimes very violently through slave rebellions, uprisings. I mentioned Haiti, which is a story that should be better known, where they overthrew their European rulers, then beat off the British, which were the French, then beat off the British, and then when Napoleon came back again, beat off the Napoleonic French, and were made independent and abolished slavery. They did that before the British did. They did that before anybody did. But also it talks about individual black people in Britain. He talks about Sierra Leone and attempting to set up colonies for free slaves there, which did not always go to plan, mainly because white people who thought they knew better would often get involved. It doesn't hide the fact that black Africans were involved in the slave trade, because a lot of slaves were captives taken in war or raids. It doesn't pussyfoot around any of these things. That's why it's such a good book, because it makes what happened feel even more impressive, because it shows you what the 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 blocks were against it ever happening, and it shows you. I mean, he quotes at the end Margaret Mead's. No, at the beginning he quotes Margaret Mead's famous line, which I can't. Never doubt, said Margaret Mead, that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And it does give credit. It's good for. Also, it's very good at illustrating how a lot of what the anti-slavery campaign did was new, but then became the pattern by which other battles were fought. And it also points out the fact that when slavery was ended, it wasn't the slaves that got money, reparations. It was the slave owners, including the Church of England, who were given money as compensation from the British government for the loss of their property. This is one of the reasons, like, why countries like Jamaica keep demanding reparations from the British government. I sometimes feel that that's a bit silly, because, countries get conquered by other countries all the time, blah, 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 blah. But actually, having read this book, we should be paying reparations to the entire West Indies. I'm not for what was done. It was... and this book doesn't push it away from the horrific nature of slavery in the West Indies either. Slavery in the West Indies was worse than slavery in the south of the USA. In terms of its brutality, and that's another thing that shouldn't be forgotten when we talk about Britain's role in ending the slave trade, and the battle the sugar plantations put up against ending slavery, to the point at which they wouldn't even help themselves by banning things like whipping of women. It was the blind arrogance of wealth and privilege, but again, there's a Gandhi quote about tyrants eventually fall. All tyrants eventually fall, and that's what gives you hope. I have paraphrased that incredibly badly, and this is a book like that. Things that look like they will never change, things that look like they are never ever going to change, they're built into society, they're built into the world, can be changed. And then once the basic change, because what happens then is, the important thing is to then keep fighting the fights that follow. It took, slavery might have ended in the West Indies, but it took a long time for black people in the West Indies to get the vote, for them to be properly free, to be independent from Britain. There were battles to be fought further and further down the line, and this book is very good in the epilogue on those kind of things. So yeah, really recommend. All three books were really, really enjoyable, but this one was, I would say, is absolutely essential reading. Probably one of the best books I've read this year so far. Probably would go into my non-fiction top 10 of all time. Can't recommend it enough. So there you go. That's where we are. 3 books finished. 2 big chunky ones. 1 smallish one. Only several thousand to go. I am never going to get these done by the time they're all due to go back on the 26th. In fact, I am thinking I am going to return a couple, because I don't really want to read them now I've been thinking about it. The one I am definitely going to return is Max Hastings' book about Sword Beach. Before I read that, I want to do a proper read around of on the Normandy campaign, and so I'm going to take this back, and then at some point I'll get it from the library again and reread it. So yeah, that's the end of my reading update. I'm sorry if that was waffly and incoherent. I haven't been well. You can hear in my voice that that's added to my problems. But sometimes you read a book and it helps restore your faith in humanity, and Bury the Chains did that for me. Have a good one. Bye bye.